What's up, crew? Welcome back to Libertalia Game Supply. Today we're going to look at this Prophecy Horus deck list that I put together here, and I promise you, unless some amazing idea comes to my mind, I will not put any more Horus engines and any more decks for at least a little while, because I feel like I'm starting to overdo it here. But I thought this idea was really cool. It lets you play the Horus monsters in a different way from the other decks that I've put up recently. So basically the idea here is we want to end the board with one of each of the Horus monsters and a Jowgen backed up by the Sarcophagus so they can't attack over your Horus monsters, as well as a loaded up Fate to help you protect that Jowgen. What that would do for you is when you pass turn, your opponent cannot special summon, so they have to remove the Jowgen in some way. Now we can protect that Jowgen from being attacked over by the Fate. We can protect it from spells and traps, hopefully by the Wisdom, but that's less of a priority. If you have it, you have it. If you don't, you can be removed by a spell card, and that's just the way it is. But because they have to remove this, it will automatically trigger all three of these effects, and there's some pretty good effects. So you would get a non-targeting send to the graveyard effect from Imseti that probably won't resolve all that often, because the first thing they're going to have to do is try to attack over this or remove it. And so if they were successful in attacking over it because you didn't have the Fate or whatever, then I suppose the Imseti would just send that to the graveyard, but most of the time that's going to be a dead effect. The Happy can take two monsters out of any graveyard or banish zone and either add them to the owner's hand or back to that owner's deck. I tend to use that myself to just load up with some of the Spellbook spell cards that I used in the previous turn that are going to let you combo again on your next turn. But if your opponent's playing some type of banished or graveyard-based deck, then you can just take those resources away from them. And the Dwayne lets you draw a card for every unique named monster on your board. So in this instance, you would draw 3, get 2 back into your hand, and then you get their removal potentially. On top of that, you still would have 3 monsters that if they were attacked into, 1 would at least get banished. This guy's got 3k attack, this would be at 3600, and this is at 24. So it still is a difficult board to get through after you've resolved all these effects, even if the Jowgen somehow gets removed. And so it's kind of a control, like grindy combo deck. It does grind decently well. The only problem is that if you get stopped on like an early effect resolution, like if you use the Imseti to search the Sark and they negate it, or you use the Blue Boy to search your Judgment and they negate it, you're kind of in a bad spot unless you open something crazy. So it's a fragile deck, but when it works, it's pretty fun to play. So we've got the 3 Blue Boy. On normal summon, it'll search a Spellbook spell card from your deck, searches anything. The Horus monsters you guys are probably pretty familiar with by now, and then the Jowgen is that floodgate. It also can be a board wipe. I use that way less often, but it can come up. And then we're playing the Magician's Soul and Illusion of Chaos package with the 3 Preparation of Rites down here. This has actually been really good for like fixing hands if you draw a lot of Spellbook spell cards that you can't use, or you happen to open multiple copies of this. You just return the illusion after searching the Magician's Soul, then send the illusion so that it doesn't brick in your hand when you draw again your next turn. To summon this, at worst, it's a material for a Link monster. It's a spellcaster, so it can be used for Selene, as well as any of the rest of them that you might want to summon. Its effect on the field is you can send 2 spell cards to the graveyard to draw 2 cards. And so if you open like both of these and you only need the one, or you open multiple copies like I said, or like if you're turn 1 and you open like Spellbook of Life that you can't really use yet, you just ditch them, draw 2 new cards. Hopefully that fixes the hand a little bit. We're playing the 3 Ash Blossom. If you're going first, this doesn't matter quite as much because you're going to try to set up your lockdown. If you're going second, man, you got to try to stop the play because, like I said, a single negate can derail this deck pretty quick. We're playing the Triple Knowledge, so draw 2 by sending a Spellcaster monster that is anything except these 2 and the Ash Blossoms, which should never see the field, or by sending a Spellbook spell card from your hand or face up field. I'm not playing any of the continuous ones, so the only one that would be on the field will be the Tower, which, you know, if you open it turn 1, you probably are going to want to send it anyway because it's not going to do anything for you. But the most relevant aspect of this, apart from being really good and consistent draw power, is that it can remove your own Jowgen. So you're looking to turn your Jowgen off. You've made your correct board, you've passed turn, they couldn't get by it. On your turn, you're going to Spellbook of Knowledge, get rid of your own Jowgen to draw 2. Hopefully you can win right there if you're really able to stop them, but if they're playing a lot of back row, maybe not. At which point you would just use your Spellbook of Life to put it back on the board. You'd have to search it, most likely. You're probably not just sitting on it. But this is one of the main pieces that makes it a really good like Vanity's Emptiness type of effect, where on your turn it doesn't apply, on your opponent's turn it does apply. That can also be true of the Spellbook of Fate. We're playing 2 of them. It's got that turn face down effect, so same deal, except you don't get the plus off of it. You banish 2 for its middle effect here. turn that Jowgen face down, do all the special summoning you want, and then if something were to happen, you would be able to flip it back face up. We also got to have the 3 Spellbook of Secrets, searches any of your Spellbook cards. And another effect of the Fate is that Banish effect. That's really important. It doesn't target and it just banishes a card for the cost of 3, so you do need to kind of set up the graveyard a little bit to have access to that. But this thing can come in super clutch, so I always want to try to have one loaded up on the board when I pass turn, just because it's a great interrupt. There's a lot of cards that don't have effects that can get around it, so good to play. I had 3 in here. It just bricked a lot, because if you have them in your opening hand, they do nothing for like fulfilling Judgment, because your opponent doesn't have anything on board yet, so you would essentially just be wasting one of the other 2 effects on your own stuff just to get something in the graveyard for Judgment or whatever the case may be. And so 2 just felt like the better option here. We've got the Lone Judgment. Ideally this is coming back to 2 or even 3 at some point. I don't think it would make the deck so overpowered that it somehow becomes meta again. There's just not enough Spellbook effects that really like crush the game. But in this deck, it's very important. So ideally, you are activating this right away turn 1. We're trying to use at least 3 Spellbook cards after that in order to be able to special summon the Jowgen in the end phase. Plus you get to add a Spellbook spell card from your deck to your hand for each Spellbook card activated after this card's resolution. So anybody that played back when this deck was like meta tier 1, like huge Dragon Ruler Prophecy format, knows that being able to refill that hand can be absolutely nuts. Like there are definitely turns where I'm adding 4, 5, 6 cards to my hand and you end up having to discard some stuff. So really the best part is if you can pass the turn and use the Jowgen to special summon itself and then put 5 cards back in your hand, if they can't get past that Jowgen, there is no way they're winning because you can just generate so much advantage off of this. We've got the 1 Mastery. I had 2 in here. It just was dead too often. You need to control a Spellcaster and you need to have another Spellbook spell card in your hand, but when you can resolve it, it's great. So for instance, you could go Secrets, search the Spellbook Magician, summon the Magician, search something else, activate the Master, reveal whatever you searched, copy the secrets, search the knowledge, use the knowledge to draw 2, and you just plus really hard off of like one little combo line, I guess 2-card combo line there. Not that it's a combo in the typical sense, but the deck thinning here was a really big reason I thought that the Horus monsters would fit into the deck nicely, just because you can trim down the size of the deck and then do some drawing, and so it should make it pretty consistent to be able to draw into like either the Horus or the Sarcophagus or the Stone Wall. We've got 1 Eternity because you can recycle a banished Spellbook spell card. That's going to be important because of Fate. It's a pretty heavy cost banishing 3, not that there's a ton of way to put them back in your deck, but there are some, the Tower being the most common one. So essentially the Fate can almost search you a spell card that you've already used. You would just banish it to activate it and then use that Eternity to get it back in your hand. The 1 Wisdom just to try to protect that Jowgen if you happen to see it. If you don't, you don't. It kind of sucks to open this one too, just because similar thing, you're essentially going to burn it for nothing just to try to fulfill Judgment or set up your Fate or whatever the case may be. The 1 Life because there's a lot of pretty good Spellcaster monsters to just summon back. The Jowgen being 1, but Imseti is also 1, and it's a 3k beater. You can use it to either reset your lock up, you can use it to put something on board to make the Selene, you know, whatever the case may be. I thought it was worth playing. And the 1 Power is probably the only one I'm not super sure about keeping in here. It boosts a Spellcaster by 1,000, and then if that monster destroys a monster, you get to add a Spellbook spell from your deck to your hand. That's okay. Usually what this ends up being is just to fulfill one of these 2 cards as requirements. That search can be relevant, but more than anything, you can boost a Imseti up to 4k, making it a very easy, huge beater to close out a game or just to get over something big. And originally I was playing the Spellbook Star Hall, which meant every time you activate a spell card, it gains a counter. All of your spellcasters gain 100 attack. So being able to stack counters and then boost by 1,000 and stack another, I was able to get the Imseti up to like 4,500, 5k sometimes. We've got the 1 Grand Spellbook Tower. At the beginning of your turn, you can take a Spellbook card from your graveyard, put it back on the bottom of your deck, and get an extra draw. So always nice drawing 2 cards at the start of turn. And then if it's destroyed by an opponent's card, you would then get to special summon a spellcaster out of your deck equal to the number of Spellbook cards in your graveyard. And we do play some little guys here. We've got 2 level 1s, 3 level 2s, and 2 level 3s. So that's a pretty easy effect to resolve. You don't get the effect off of the Magician if it's special summoned, unfortunately, but even as just link material, it's good. We've got a pretty heavy Horus spell lineup here. 3 of the Field Spell, 1 of the Sarcophagus. Like I said, it's just really important to get that Horus engine rolling just to try to make that board as strong as possible. And so this kind of does that. It's a search card without being a really great search card, so it feels kind of balanced. If this acted more like a Tenki or a Rhoda or something, it would be nuts. You would never not play 3 of them. I could probably justify cutting it down to 1 or 2, but I just really don't want to be without that Mseti turn 1 if possible. We talked about the preps, and we've got the 1 Canopic Protector. I really like this card, especially in grindy-based decks. Anytime an effect resolves, you can just special summon one of your Horus monsters out of the graveyard. This also would mean that you would be able to summon all of them twice, essentially. So if you had the Protector and, say, either of these, you would be able to use this every time you resolve your own effect to special summon one of them, only one each. And then its limit is only that it can only summon from its own effect each of these one time. But then they could also summon themselves with the Sarcophagus on board, so you could really get wild with the rank 8 plays there. And on top of that, it's a free discard for Sarcophagus, so if you discard it, its effect will set it back to your field, and you still get to have it. So whole lot of pluses there. It's a slower card, but I feel like the upside is way better than the downside. In the extra deck, you can make use of a lot of this actually. It's pretty easy to set up the SP and the IP play, especially if you have Judgment. It's possible to end up with a hand that lets you fulfill a Judgment, put a Jowgen on board, but not a hand that lets you put your Horus monsters on board, in which case you're going to try to put the SP on board, just because it can also kind of protect that Jowgen. So if they were to summon something that would remove it and you're able to banish and banish to stop that effect, great. Otherwise, you can banish itself and banish the Jowgen, and then you get them both back in the end phase, so as long as you survive the turn, you're still good to go there. The 1 Unicorn just fits in with the IP there. The 1 Selene and Access Code are just excellent in this deck. It's almost free. You just easily put up spellcasters. Your spell counters on the Selene is always going to be like 1,000. It's going to be absurd. And so you're always going to have access to this as soon as you can get your deck rolling. For the rank 8s, we're playing a lot of the standard Horus stuff at the moment. The Giant Trainer, the Lubellion, the Titanic Galaxy, and the Numeron Dragon, because it facilitates pretty easy OTK. We've got the 1 Zombie Vampire just because it's a really solid card, and this was an interesting one. It's not as good as I thought it was initially. I had thought that its Search or Special Summon effect was a quick effect, which made me think, man, this is ridiculous. How is nobody else playing it? It's essentially a Nibiru, but for 3 cards instead of 5. But unfortunately, I put an imaginary period in the effect where it was not one, so it is not a quick effect, unfortunately, but I still think that it can be a relevant card. So it's just any 2 level 8 monsters, so say you only were able to summon these 2 for whatever reason. A lot of these effects require you to control a spellcaster monster, so you can overlay for this 3k spellcaster beater. It also has its own built-in protection, so if it would be destroyed, you can detach a material instead. And then every time your opponent resolves an effect that isn't a spell effect, it gains a spell counter. On your turn, you can remove 3 of them to either add a spell or spellcaster effect monster from your deck to your hand, or special summon a spellcaster from your deck. Now this would also mean that you could special summon the Jowgen in this way, not just through the Judgment. But I think the most powerful thing here is that, yeah, you can get the Jowgen, but it also just searches a spell card. Any spell card. So if it survives a turn and it gets passed back to you, it can search whatever you need, and a lot of times a hand will be, or a field will be, just 1 card away from being able to really take off. And so this has been a pretty interesting card. I like it so far. We're playing this little Zeus package here, the Centauria, the Downerd, and the Zeus. I don't think this is really that great. You could really just cut this and this all together. The Zeus can go over anything else, obviously. And you're not usually going to try to leave 2 of these on board. It does come up, but typically if that happens, I'm going to be using the Knowledge to get rid of 1 and draw 2 anyway. It's just if it does happen, I guess you can get that Banish off of the Cavalry, rank it up into Downerd in main phase 2, and then right into the Zeus. And then this has probably been the MVP as far as like a generic Xyz monster in this deck would go. Now the rest of these are really great and can outright win you games, but this fixes a terrible board pretty quickly. Now this is predominantly only going to be the case when you're going second. Because of its summoning condition, they need to have special summon 2 or more monsters. But when you're trying to play through a board, it's really easy to get your Blue Boy or your Souls negated, and then they just sit there, and usually you're trying to use them because the hand isn't good enough to do something else, or you're just trying to bait out negates or something, which is also cool. But in that instance, you can then just slap this on top of it. You now have a 2900 attack beast, and you have a compulse effect that you can use to try to remove some threats. So rather than passing a turn with some 500 attack monster that can't do anything anymore, you can pass the turn with Typhon, you can bounce something. At least you have some type of protection having been stopped, and so I really love this card. This stuff down here can pretty much just be ignored. My idea was essentially that you could side out the Horus monsters and kind of smokescreen just into Jougin control. So you would get rid of all the Horus stuff and fill it in with a bunch of hand traps. Probably not the Nibiru. The Droll would be better because Jougin is going to make it so they never hit that Nibiru summon limit anyway. The Secret Village would shut them off from spell cards. That protects the Jougin even more. And then the Moon Mirror would make it impossible for them to attack over. I think the idea would work just fine. I just don't think it gains you any particular advantage that you don't already have with this version of the deck. It's essentially the same. It might be a little bit more consistent, but that deck's been made a few times, and I'm sure you've seen videos on it if you're looking for these types of deck lists to begin with, so never mind it. And these are not actually going to be in the deck ever again, unfortunately, which makes me sad because this was a pretty cool card back in the day. Just a free 2500 body that can destroy something on the field, but unfortunately it just does not fit in the current game. It's fairly slow. The cost is actually kind of high. You got to keep a certain number of cards in your hand to use it. You got to load up the graveyard like you would for Fate. Even though it's only one, it also targets and destroys, and there's a lot of effects that get around that now. And so I think officially this could never see play in the deck again unless they get some ridiculous support that somehow makes it good. Now I'm going to try to get some replays for you. Maybe that'll work, maybe it won't. I've had quite the day trying to get this computer to work again. My microphone stopped working. It's a whole thing. If I do, they'll play right after I finish closing this out here. If I don't, you're just going to have to try it yourself and let me know how it works for you. But until next time, happy deck building. Have a good one. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Tear us apart and bury me all in my head alone, calling your name but only feel the cold. I sense the change in energy. All of my fuse is blown. If burns inside, building a bonfire. So how do we end up here? Could have sworn